Hello guys. Today we'll see about Salesforce real-time interview questions with answers. I requesting to subscribe to my channel for more Salesforce related videos. How to convert carriage returns in text area to line breaks in Visualforce? We can use Apex output field instead of Apex output text. It will maintain formatting automatically. Once you convert lead, few fields on lead should be reset so that sensitive information should not be queried using SOQL. How to get this done? Once lead is converted, it's read only. We cannot update it using Apex or trigger. However, we can use before update trigger on lead and check for fields is converted. If it's true means lead is going to be converted, so reset all fields in that case. System admin has created a Visualforce for account. In future he created few more new fields. How could system admin can code Visualforce so that in future if any new field is added or existing field deleted, it should reflect in Visualforce without changing any code? It can be done with help of field sets. How to get IP address of user in Apex? String IP address is equal to apex pages.currentpage.getHeaders.get x Salesforce SIP. True. Client IP has the value when the request is coming via the caching integration. X Salesforce SIP has the value if there is no caching integration, sandbox, developer edition orgs, or via the secure URL. Why CSS is not working in PDF created by Visualforce? In many cases, I have observed problems faced by my colleagues and complaining that CSS is not working when they try to render any Visualforce page as PDF. Basically, there are two ways. Use Apex style sheet tag to import external CSS file wrap style tag inside head tag in Visualforce. User wants to set the starting day in calendar as Monday instead of Sunday. How to get it done? Change the user locale to English, United Kingdom, in personal information or user record. Explain few considerations for add future annotation in Apex. Method must be static. Cannot return anything, only void. To test add future methods, you should use start test and stop test to make it synchronous inside test class. Parameter to add future method can only be primitive or collection of primitive data type. Cannot be used inside VF and constructor, set or get methods. Add future method cannot call other add future method. Explain considerations for static keyword in Apex. Apex classes cannot be static. Static allowed only in outer class. Static variables not transferred as a part of view state. Static variables and static block runs in order in which they are written in class. Static variables are static only in scope of request. What is difference between public and global class in Apex? Public class can be accessed within application or namespace. This is not exactly like public modifier in Java. Global class visible everywhere, any application or namespace. Web service must be declared as global and which can be accessed inside JavaScript also. It is like public modifier in Java. What are few considerations about trigger? Upsert triggers fire both before and after insert or before and after update triggers as appropriate. Merge triggers fire both before and after delete triggers for the losing records and before update triggers for the winning record only. Triggers that execute after a record has been undeleted only work with specific objects. Field history is not recorded until the end of a trigger. If you query field history in a trigger, you will not see any history for the current transaction. You can only use the web service keyword in a trigger when it is in a method defined as asynchronous. That is, when the method is defined with the @future keyword. A trigger invoked by an insert, delete, or update of a recurring event or recurring task results in a runtime error when the trigger is called in bulk from the force.com API. Merge trigger doesn't fire their own trigger, instead they fire delete and update of losing and winning records respectively. What are few limitations, points to remember, of SavePoint or transaction control in Apex? Each SavePoint you set counts against the governor limit for DML statements. Static variables are not reverted during a rollback. If you try to run the trigger again, the static variables retain the values from the first run. Each rollback counts against the governor limit for DML statements. You will receive a runtime error if you try to roll back the database additional times. The ID on an object inserted after setting a save point is not cleared after a rollback. If you set more than one save point, then roll back to a save point that is not the last save point you generated. What will happen to later save point variables? If you generated save point SP1 first, save point SP2 after that, and then you rolled back to SP1, the variable SP2 would no longer be valid. You will receive a runtime error if you try to use it. How can you lock record using SOCL so that it cannot be modified by other user? We will need for update clause of SOCL. Example, account ACCTS is equal to select ID from account limit to for update. After data export using data loader, sometime it appears that data is on new line, carriage return, when we open CSV file in Microsoft Excel. For example, address data separated on different lines. How can we override this problem? Excel does all sorts of useful things when it opens a CSV file. It will format dates, strip leading zeros, corrupt record IDs, if you have them in your report, and as explained it will also break line. Best way as per my experience till date is upload document to Google Drive. Export document back from Google Drive as Excel. How you can use datetime field as a criteria in SOCL query? We cannot use datetime as condition in where clause in between single quotes. You can do something like this, where created date greater than 2005-10-08, or you can also use date literals like where created date greater than yesterday. While creating dynamic SOCL, which involves datetime, gives no viable alternative at character EOF error. Or, value of filter criterion for field created date must be of type datetime and should not be enclosed in quotes. Or, how to use datetime in dynamic SOCL query in Salesforce? This error is because of wrong construction of dynamic query with datetime. Following code snippet will give idea on how to construct dynamic query for datetime. Format the datetime to make it dynamic SOCL ready. String formatted DT is equal to cutoff datetime dot format year month date hours minutes seconds. String SQL is equal to select a dot ID from agents underscore answer underscore underscore C where a dot agents underscore test underscore result underscore R dot agent underscore name underscore R dot ICE active underscore C is equal to false and last modified date less than plus formatted DT. Where cutoff date time is variable of date time type. Can we mass delete reports using Apex, anonymous Apex? Salesforce has not exposed any API for reports. So best way is move all reports needs to delete in new folder. Inform everyone that reports will be deleted after some time, maybe 30 days. Import your reports folder in Eclipse including all reports to be deleted and then delete the reports folder in Eclipse. It will delete all the reports at once. Why are Visualforce pages served from a different domain? If we see carefully, all our Visualforce pages are served like c.yourserver.visual.force.com/apex/your page name. And because of this most of time we run into same origin policy error in JavaScript if we try to access parent page from iframe. Following reason is explained by one of the evangelists of Salesforce. The move to separate domains has one very specific purpose. Leverage the browser security model, same domain policy, to protect our customers and the Salesforce.com service from cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgery attacks. Moving to the serving pages from separate domains is a critical component of our ongoing commitment to ensure the highest level of security and availability for everyone. In the world where everything is served from the same domain, any custom page that you visit had full access to any other page in your org and also any page served from Salesforce.com itself. This included potentially malicious code that was installed as part of a Force.com package. Sometimes while deleting record it gives error object cannot be deleted. What is the reason for this kind of error? This is generic error message prompted by Salesforce many times, which is not well informative. To get informative message, we can try to delete same record in developer console. In developer console debug log, we will get exact error message. Example, let's say there is one record which is parent of more than 2000 records and grandparent of 5000 records. In such scenario from developer console it gives error something like record cannot be deleted because it has many associated objects. However, in user interface, it will just display that object cannot be deleted. How we can check API limits already used in any organization by using REST or SOAP API? SOAP API and REST API always returns header after making successful call to Salesforce. Account, report, Salesforce, SOCL, standard report visibility, Apex, Visualforce, data loader and SOCL. How to display more than 1000 records in repeater or page block table component of Visualforce? If circumstances permits, we can use read-only attribute available at Apex page level. Read more about making complete page read-only. How many record can be displayed in repeater or page block table in Visualforce? Current limit is 1000 records. How to disable header ribbon in Salesforce organization where community is enabled? In Profile View Global Header controls visibility of black ribbon which is used to switch between community. Which component in Salesforce ends with __MDT and __is? Custom metadata types ends with __MDT. Metadata type Just like custom object or custom fields ends with __c. When we create geolocation field in Salesforce, let's say by name location __c, then internally Salesforce creates subfields with extension __is. In this case, location _latitude _is and location _longitude _is. What is custom metadata type? Custom metadata was introduced generally in summer 15 release. Before custom metadata type, we were using custom settings of list type. Problem with custom setting was that, during migration or in packages, data were not migrated. We had to either use data loader or some API to create initial data. However, if we package custom metadata type or migrate it, data will also be migrated along with it. What causes concurrent apex limit error in Salesforce? If synchronous apex runs more than 5 seconds, it considered as long-running job. And we have limit that only 10 long-running job can execute at a time. So, whenever 11th synchronous apex tries to execute, it gets concurrent apex limit error. Difference between Chutter API and AMP Connect API. Chutter API is REST API for Chutter to display Salesforce data, especially in mobile applications. Responses are localized, structured for presentation, and can be filtered to contain only what the app needs. Connect API provides Apex classes for accessing the same data available in Chutter REST API. Use Chutter in Apex to create custom Chutter experiences in Salesforce. Which custom fields or relationships in Salesforce ends with __pc and __pr? In normal scenario, all custom fields ends with __c and relationships ends with __r. However, for person accounts, custom fields ends with __pc and custom relationship ends with __pr. How to report on user license field? Create formula field in user object with formula profile.userlicense.name. Note: you need to copy and paste this value because it doesn't show up in the fields drop-down. What may be reason truncate button is not visible on custom object? Are referenced by another object through a lookup field or that are on the master side of a master detail relationship. Are referenced in a reporting snapshot, have a custom index or an external ID. How to enable truncate custom object feature in Salesforce? Navigate to App Setup vertical bar User Interface and select Enable Custom Object Truncate. While creating JavaScript button to execute anonymous Apex, what should you keep in mind? End user must needs to have Apex author permission, and this is something should not be granted to end user. Also, while creating JavaScript button, user must be aware that it's only supported in Salesforce Classic and not in Salesforce Lightning. Difference between REST and SOAP API? SOAP API supports data in the form of XML only. Requires WSDL for the integration. Use SOAP API in any language that supports web services. REST API supports both XML and JSON format. Preferred for mobile and web apps since JSON being lighter, the app runs smoother and faster. You can also use Apex SOAP and REST web services to expose data from platform or allow an external application to invoke Apex methods. How to use HTTP callouts in batch class? To use HTTP callouts in batch class, we need to use database.allow callouts in interface. What is Apex design pattern? Singleton. Repeated execution of a class within a single transaction may lead to exceed the governor limit. This pattern is to reduce repeated instantiation of a class. Strategy. Strategy pattern is to provide different solutions for the same problem at runtime. Decorator. This pattern is used to provide the additional functionality to this object using Apex code. Bulk state transition. Implementing bulk state transition ensures that the bulk action is performed based on the change of bulk record state. What is difference between SOCL and SOCL? SOCL, Salesforce Object Query Language. Using SOCL, we can search only on one object at a time. We can query on all fields of any data type. We can use SOCL in triggers and classes. We can perform DML operation on query results. SOCL, Salesforce Object Search Language. Using SOCL, we can search on many objects at a time. We can query only on fields whose data type is text, phone, and email. We can use in classes but not in triggers. We cannot perform DML operation on search result. What is difference between trigger and workflow? Workflow. Workflow is automated process that fired an action based on evaluation criteria and rule criteria. We can access a workflow across the object. We cannot perform DML operation on workflow. We cannot query from database. Trigger. Trigger is a piece of code that executes before or after a record is inserted or updated. We can access the trigger across the object and relate it to that objects. We can use 20 DML operations in one trigger. We can use 20 SOCL from database in one trigger. Can we deactivate trigger in production? We can do it using custom settings. We can create custom settings where we have checkbox field which will refer in the trigger and modify that record value to make it active or inactive. How can we monitor batch job? We can monitor a bulk API job in Salesforce. The monitoring page tracks jobs and batches created by any client application. Can we use DML operation on before and trigger? When we use before insert operation, records are not committed to database. Here we don't need DML operations as whatever values we give in our code is automatically assigned to that record. After triggers, the record is already committed to the database, hence we need an extra DML operation to reflect any changes. What will happen if SOCL query is written in for loop to access custom metadata candidate response? It will hit the governor limit. There is a governor limit that enforces a maximum number of SOCL queries. When queries are placed inside a for loop, a query is executed on each iteration and governor limit is easily reached. What is with sharing and without sharing? With sharing, it means with security settings enforced. If you declare a class as a with sharing, sharing rules given to the current user will be taken into the consideration. This pertains to only respecting OWD and sharing rules. We cannot automatically enforce field-level security or profile permissions with sharing. Without sharing. If you declare a class as a without sharing, then this Apex class runs in system mode, which means Apex code has access to all the objects and field irrespective of current users' sharing rules, field-level security and object permissions. How to avoid recursion? To avoid the situation of recursive call, we have to write code in such a way that the trigger will execute one time. To do so, we can create a class with a static Boolean variable with default value true. What is recursion? Recursion occurs when same code is executed again and again. It can lead to infinite loop and which can result to governor limit sometime. What are access modifiers in Apex? Apex allows you to use the private, protected, public, and global access modifiers when defining methods and variables. Private. The method or variable is accessible only within the Apex class in which it is defined. Note: by default all variables are private. Protected. The method or variable is visible to any inner classes in the defining Apex class, and to the classes that extend the defining Apex class. Public. The method or variable can be used by any Apex in this application or namespace. Global. The method or variable can be used by any Apex code that has access to the class, not just the Apex code in the same application. Can we declare static variable inside method? We cannot declare variable as static inside a method. What is the difference between keyword and literal? Keyword, reserved word having specific meaning. The words which have meaning already defined. We cannot use keyword to define variable. Literal, the name which we give. Like variable name. Difference between static and non-static members of the class? Static. Static means that it's a variable or method of a class which belongs to the whole class but not to one of its certain objects. This means that static keyword can be used only in a class scope. We can access those members from outside the class also using the class name without instantiating a new instance of the class. Examples of static methods could be convert millimeters to centimeters, subtract to numbers, and convert string to uppercase. Non-static method and variables must have a new instance of the class instantiated in order to be used. Typically, these rely on data inside the class that then is referred to inside the class. Examples of non-static methods include lead convert, delete opportunity, and edit contact. What are the considerations while using future method? Methods with the future annotation must be static. It can only return void data type. The parameter must be primitive data types, arrays of primitive data types, or collections of primitive data types. What are use cases of future method? Make a callout to external web services. Avoid mixed DML operation exception. What are setup objects? Setup objects are those which interacts with metadata. All other object, standard and custom, are non-setup object. Can we make callout directly from trigger? No, we cannot. Callout is a asynchronous process whereas trigger is dynamic/synchronous. Callouts would hold up the database transaction until the callout completed. which can be up to 120 seconds from a limits perspective. This could cause significant contention with other transactions and impact performance. That means it is not directly possible to do a web service callout from a trigger. But using @future annotation, we can convert the trigger into a asynchronous class and we can use a callout method. What is the best approach of making callout to external web services? Future method invoked through triggers allowed to do Apex callouts and invoke external web service provided. The future method is annotated with @future callout is equal to true. This provides lot of flexibility and one of the best approaches. What are limitation of outbound messages? We have outbound messages as one of the actions for workflows. This works if other party implements the WSDL that is generated once outbound messaging is defined with appropriate endpoint. Can we call Apex class from Process Builder? Yes, we can call an Apex class from Process Builder. To call an Apex method, add the call Apex action to your process and select an Apex class with a @invocable method annotation. What is invocable method annotation? This annotation lets us mark an Apex method as being something that can be called from somewhere other than Apex. What is TOTP? TOTP is time-based one-time password. We can use login flow that enhances TOTP authentication with a two-factor authentication method that Salesforce supports. The TOTP algorithm computes a one-time password from a shared secret key and the current time. Users can use a time-based authentication application, such as Salesforce Authenticator or Google Authenticator, to scan the QR code and generate a TOTP token. What is custom login flows? Login flow is powerful solution for organization. Flow Designer is a point-and-click tool that lets you automate business processes by building flows. Common use cases includes collecting and updating user data at login, configuring two-factor authentication, integrating third-party strong authentication methods. Why and how to convert a 15-digit character ID to an 18-digit character ID? We can convert 15-digit character IDs to 18-digit character IDs to update records, or to make it easier to work in systems that aren't case sensitive. Create a formula that will give you the 18-digit character ID of records. What is unique ID? Every record, regardless of entity type, has a globally unique identification value in its ID field, which is generated at the time of record creation. That record ID value will never change, even if the record is deleted and then undeleted. What is the use of external ID? It is mainly used for integration purpose. The field becomes searchable in the sidebar search. We can use the upsert API call with the external ID to refer to records. What is external ID? An external ID is a custom field that has the external ID attribute, meaning that it contains unique record identifiers from a system outside of Salesforce. How to deactivate a validation for a particular user in production? For deactivating for a particular user, we will use hierarchy custom settings. A type of custom setting that uses a built-in hierarchical logic that lets us personalize settings for specific profiles or users. What is database.rollback? Rollback is an operation which returns the database to some previous state. Rollbacks are important for database integrity because they mean that the database can be restored to a clean copy even after erroneous operations are performed. What are the considerations while using save point? If you set more than one save point, then roll back to a save point that is not the last save point you generated. The later save point variables become invalid. References to save points cannot cross-trigger invocations because each trigger invocation is a new execution context. If you declare a save point as a static variable then try to use it across trigger contexts, you will receive a runtime error. Each save point you set counts against the governor limit for DML statements. What is database.savePoint? Database.savePoint is a method which is used to define a point which can be rolled back to. If any error occurs during a transaction that contains many statements, the application will roll back to the most recent save point and the entire transaction will not be aborted. What are the limitations of manual sharing? Manual sharing cannot be stricter than organization-wide defaults. Manual sharing is only available on individual records. It is not available for all records of a certain object. Only applicable on records that have private or public read-only access in OWD. When setting automatic and manual sharing, users and admins should define if the security should be extended to related records. What are considerations while using Apex managed sharing? If record owner changes, then sharing created through Apex managed sharing are maintained, but if users share record manually, then record sharing will be lost if owner changes. User with modify all data can only add, edit or delete records in share table. What is the difference between Apex managed sharing and with sharing? Apex managed sharing is used to grant the access to the records. It is about programmatically configuring sharing rules. Keyword with sharing is used to respect the current user sharing rule. What are the considerations while using with sharing? If the class is not declared as with sharing or without sharing, then the class is by default taken as without sharing. Both inner classes and outer classes can be declared as with sharing. If inner class is declared as with sharing and top-level class is declared as without sharing, then by default entire context will run in with sharing context. If a class is not declared as with/without sharing and if this class is called by another class in which sharing rules is enforced, then both the classes run with sharing. Outer class is declared as with sharing and inner class is declared as without sharing. Then inner class runs in without sharing context only. Inner class don't take the sharing properties from outer class. Is Apex class always execute in system context? Yes, Apex class always execute in system context. I.E. Apex code has access to all objects and fields irrespective of the logged-in user. What are scenarios where we can use without sharing? If we have VF page in which we are showing sales rep performance which displays a flag in red, green and yellow. Now ideally this field should not be visible whenever a sales rep accesses this page. But it is always visible if the class has no keyword specified or if a class has without sharing specified. We want to use Apex class globally for integration purpose. Then we can use without sharing. What are the best practice in avoiding trigger recursion? 1 trigger per object. Logic. Less triggers. Use helper classes to handle logic. Code coverage 100%. Handle recursion. To avoid the recursion on trigger, we should make sure our trigger is getting executed only one time. Difference between before and after trigger? Before triggers can be used to update or validate record values before they are saved to the database. Use before trigger in the case of validation check in the same object. Insert or update the same object. After triggers can be used to access field values that are set by the database, such as a record's ID or last updated field, and to affect changes in other records, such as logging into an audit table or firing asynchronous events with a queue. Use after trigger insert or update related object, not the same object. Notification email. Note: we cannot use after trigger if we want to update a record because it causes read-only error. This is because, after inserting or updating, we cannot update a record. What are the solutions for mixed DML operation? Separate the setup object and non-setup object DML operation using future method. System.run as. Enclose mixed DML operations within system.run as blocks to avoid the mixed DML error in test class. What are mixed DML exception? This error means that two subjects, setup and amp, non-setup, that we are using in our code cannot mix during the same transactions. This restriction exists because some S-objects affect the user's access to records in the org. For example, we cannot insert an account and then insert a user or a group member in a single transaction. To avoid this error, we should perform DML operation on standard or custom object records in a different transaction. What is system.run as? Generally, all Apex code runs in system mode, where the permissions and record sharing of the current user are not taken into account. The system method run as enables us to write test methods that change the user context to an existing user or a new user so that the user's record sharing is enforced. The run as method doesn't enforce user permissions or field level permissions, only record sharing. We can use run as only in test methods. How to call future methods from process builder? To call future methods from process builder, call the future method from the invocable method. Whenever case is created, send email to case owner. How to do that? We can do it using workflow. How to test chaining? You can't chain queuable jobs in an Apex test. So you have to write separate test cases for each chained queuable job. Also, while chaining the jobs, add a check of test.isRunning test before calling the enview job. How to test a queuable job? A queuable job is an asynchronous process. To ensure that this process runs within the test method, the job is submitted to the queue between the test.startTest and test.stopTest block. Also, the ID of a queuable Apex job isn't returned in test context. System.enview job returns null in a running test. I have a use case to call more than one queuable jobs from a batch Apex. How can I achieve it? Since we can't call more than one queuable job from each execution context, we can go for scheduling the queuable jobs. How can we handle this error without using a try, catch? We can check whether the current count of queuable jobs has exceeded the limit or not. If not, queue them. Limits.getQueubleJobs returns the currently queued jobs count. Limits.getLimitQueubleJobs returns the limit. If limits.getQueubleJobs and LT limits.getLimitQueubleJobs system.enviewJob. If I have written more than one system.enviewJob call, what will happen? System will throw limit exception stating too many queuable jobs added to the queue. N. Can I call queuable from a batch? Yes, but you're limited to just one system.enqueue job call per execute in the database.batchable class. Salesforce has imposed this limitation to prevent explosive execution. Can I chain a job that has implemented allows callouts from a job that doesn't have? Yes, callouts are also allowed in chained queuable jobs. How many numbers of jobs I can queue using system.enqueueJob at a time? You can add up to 50 jobs to the queue with system.enqueueJob in a single transaction in synchronous Apex. In asynchronous transactions, you can add only one job to the queue. How many numbers of jobs can be chained at a time? You can add only one job from an executing job, which means that only one child job can exist for each parent job. Since no limit is enforced on the depth of chain jobs, you can chain one job to another. You can repeat this process with each new child job to link it to a new child job. How chaining works in queuable Apex. Chaining allows us to customize the execution order of a set of jobs in a process. Let's say there are n jobs, A, B, C and so on. We have a process in which A has to run first and gives output to B, and then B runs and gives output to C and so on. So, instead of calling the individual queuable jobs explicitly, we can link the calls logically within queuable jobs. Can I do callouts from a queuable job? Yes, you have to implement the database.allows callouts interface to do callouts from queuable jobs. I have 200 records to be processed using queuable Apex. How can I divide the execution context for every 100 records? Similar to future jobs, queuable jobs don't process batches, so you can't divide the execution context. It will process all 200 records in a single execution context. How can I use this job ID to trace the job? Just perform a SOQL query on async Apex job by filtering on the job ID. Async Apex job info is equal to select status, number of errors from async Apex job where ID like job ID. How can I queue above job, queuable Apex example? Using system.enqueueJob method. ID job ID is equal to system.enqueueJob, new queuable Apex example. What is queuable context? It is an interface that is implemented internally by Apex and contains the job ID. Once you queue the queuable job, the job ID will be returned to you by Apex through queuable contexts getJobID method. Can you write a sample queuable job? Create a class, implement the Qubel interface, and override the execute method. Public class Qubel Apex example implements Qubel, public void execute, Qubel context, some process. How does Qubel Apex differ from future methods? Qubel Apex is similar to future methods in that they're both queued for execution, but they provide us these additional benefits. When you queue a Qubel Apex, you get a job ID that can be used to trace it easily, which is not possible in case of future methods. You can use non-primitive data types in Qubel Apex, like objects and objects, which is not possible in case of future methods, because it supports only primitive data types as params. You can chain jobs by calling another starting a second job from a running job, which is not possible in case of future methods, because we can't call another future method from a future context. What is Qubel Apex? It's an extension of the future methods. It uses the Qubel interface, which is an enhanced way of running your asynchronous Apex code compared to using future methods. The limitations which future methods have, through Qubel Apex, we can overcome them. Autunde event does not work with Apex. Action support in Internet Explorer 9. How to resolve this error? If we add the header on Visualforce page, then it creates lots of problem in Internet Explorer 9. I think there are few Java script library loaded by header of Salesforce, which makes Internet Explorer 9 compatible. So the best solution is to enable the header by using show header is equal to true in Apex page. What is overriding? Abrogating is a protest-situated programming highlight that empowers a type class to give diverse usage to a strategy that is as of now characterized and additionally actualized in its parent class or one of its parent classes. The overriding technique in the kit class ought to have a similar name, mark, and parameters as the one in its parent class. What is overloading? Overburdening alludes to the capacity to utilize a solitary identifier to characterize numerous techniques for a class that contrasts in their information and yield parameters. Overburden techniques are for the most part utilized when they reasonably execute a similar undertaking yet with a somewhat unique arrangement of parameters. What is a virtual class? In protest-situated programming, a virtual class is a settled invert class whose capacities and part factors can be abrogated and reclassified by subclass of the external class. Virtual classes are closely resembling virtual capacities. What are outbound messages? What it will contain? An outbound message contains the endpoint URL. How do you pass the parameters from one Apex class to another? You can simply pass the parameters through the URL. What is the page reference? A page reference is a reference to an instantiation of a page. Among different characteristics, page references comprise of a URL and an arrangement of inquiry parameter names and qualities. How to insert value to a parent and child element at the same time? Use triggers. What is an abstract class? Abstract classes will be classes that contain at least one dynamic strategies. A conceptual technique is a strategy that is pronounced however contains no usage. Unique classes may not be instantiated. and expect subclass to give usage to the theoretical techniques. In which object all Apex triggers are stored? Apex trigger. What is the condition to call a method from trigger which is making callout? The callout should be asynchronous. What are the context variable available with after undelete event? Trigger.new and trigger.new map. What are the context variable available with after delete event? Trigger.old and trigger.old map. What are the context variable available with before delete event? Trigger.old and trigger.old map. What are the context variable available with after update event? Trigger.new, trigger.old, trigger.new map and trigger.old map. What are the context variable available with before update event? Trigger.new, trigger.old, trigger.new map and trigger.old map. What are the context variable available with after insert event? Trigger.new and trigger.new map. What are the context variable available with before insert event? Only trigger.new is available. What is the difference between database.insert and insert? Using insert, if one record fails, entire operation is stopped and none of the record is inserted into database. Whereas with database.insert, partial insertion is supported. What is the use of trigger dot is executing? Suppose we have a method in Apex class and we want this method to run only when the method is getting called from Apex trigger, then we can make use of trigger dot is executing in Apex class to check if the method is getting called from trigger. How to restrict trigger to fire only once, recursive trigger? Recursion occurs when your trigger fires again and again. The situation such as when you are using after update trigger and updating parent record and again on parent record. There is a trigger which updates child records. It can lead to an infinite loop. Is there any limit on number of triggers defined on an object? We can define as many triggers on an object as we want, but it is recommended to have one trigger per object because the order of execution of different trigger is not guaranteed and any trigger can fire first. What do you mean by the bulkifying trigger? A trigger should be able to handle single record and thousands of record. There are two important points for it. Write triggers that operate on collections of S objects. Write triggers that perform efficient SOCL and DML operations. If we will not follow above point, we may hit governor limit when records are created or updated or deleted in mass using data loader or other tool. Define recursive trigger and how to avoid it. There is a possibility that the result of the trigger can end up calling the same trigger again and can run in a loop. This is known as a recursive trigger. To avoid this scenario, we should create a static variable and check the value of this variable before we execute anything in the trigger. Can a trigger make a call to Apex callout method? We can call a callout method in Apex trigger, but the only condition is that it has to be an asynchronous callout because the trigger flow cannot wait on the response received by the callout method. Can a trigger call a batch class? Yes, we can call a batch class in the trigger as we do in the normal Apex code. How is trigger.new different from trigger.old? Trigger.new variable returns the list of S-object, which has invoked the trigger, and trigger.old returns a list of the older versions of the records, which have invoked the trigger. Trigger.old is only available in update and delete events. How is trigger.new different from trigger.newMap? Trigger.new variable returns the list of S-object, which has invoked the trigger, and trigger.newMap returns the map of IDs with the newly entered records. New map is only available in after insert, before and after the update, and after undelete. What are context variables in triggers? All triggers define implicit variables that allow developers to access run-time context. These variables are contained in the system.trigger class. What are the various events on which a trigger can fire? A trigger is a set of statements which can be executed on the following events. In above trigger events, one or more of below events can be used with comma separated. Before insert, before update, before delete, after insert, after update, after delete, after undelete. What is MVC architecture? When a custom object is created in Salesforce, an AVF is created to display the details of the record of the custom object using controller. In this scenario, we observe a three parts object creation. Visual Force page, controller. Object creation is a part of model. Visual Force page is a part of view. Controller is a part of controller. What is the use of @future annotation? Future annotations are used to identify and execute methods asynchronously. If the method is annotated with @future, then it will be executed only when Salesforce has the available resources. How many records can a select query return? How many records can a social query return? The governor limits enforces the following. Maximum number of records that can be retrieved by SOCL command, 50,000. Maximum number of records that can be retrieved by social command, 2000. How to get the user ID of all the currently logged in users using Apex code? You can get the IDs of all the currently logged in users by using this global function, userinfo.getUserID. How can you call a controller method from JavaScript? To call a controller method, Apex function, from JavaScript, you need to use action function. How can you expose an Apex class as a REST web service in Salesforce? You can expose your Apex class and methods so that external applications can access your code and your application through the REST architecture. This is done by defining your Apex class with the @REST resource annotation to expose it as a REST resource. You can then use global classes and a web service callback method. How many callouts to external service can be made in a single Apex transaction? Governor limits will restrict a single Apex transaction to make a maximum of 100 callouts to an HTTP request or an API call. Which fields are automatically indexed in Salesforce? Only the following fields are automatically indexed in Salesforce. Primary keys, ID, name and owner fields. Foreign keys, lookup or master, detail relationship fields. Audit dates, such as system mod stamp. Custom fields marked as an external ID or a unique field. Why are Visualforce pages served from a different domain? Visualforce pages are served from a different domain to improve security standards and block cross-site scripting. What is the difference between trigger and workflow? Workflow is an automated process that fires an action based on evaluation criteria and rule criteria. Trigger is the code that is executed on or after the record is updated or inserted. What is the trigger? The trigger is the code that is executed before or after the record is updated or inserted. What are the different ways of Salesforce deployment? Salesforce code is deployed with Salesforce packages, change sets, migration tools, Eclipse with Force.com IDE, decommissioned, Microsoft Visual Code. What is the minimum test coverage that is required for deployment? At least 75% of your Apex code must be covered by unit tests in Salesforce, and all these tests must be completed successfully. Why do you write test classes? Test classes refer to the maximum lines of code covered when your execution takes place. If you want to develop a robust and error-free code, then the test classes are used as a tool for testing your code. It ensures that if any Apex customization has to be deployed in your org, then it will operate properly. Every test class will be annotated with that is test keyword. In fact, we must annotate a test class with that is test for defining as a test class. If the keyword test method is used within any method within a class, then it is called as a test method. What is the development mode? When do we enable the development mode? How do we do it? The best way to build Visualforce pages is to enable the development mode. It makes it easy to simultaneously view the code and output. The development mode helps in define new Visualforce pages by entering a new URL. Error messages containing detailed stack traces than what is received by the standard users. Displays a footer with the page's view state, a link to component reference documentation, and any associated controller link. Offers page markup editor for highlighting find, replace functionality as well as auto suggest for attribute names and component tags. Can we reference standard controller and controller attribute at the same time? No, it is not possible to reference both the standard controller and the controller at the same time. Use the reference attribute to reference the standard controller with the custom controller. What is the use of debug log? Debug log is used for catching the exception. What are the development tools for Apex? The development tools for Apex are Force.com Developer Tools, Force.com IDE and Code Editor, Microsoft Visual Code. How long is bit variable for a long statement? The long statement has 64 bit. What does the data wrapper class contain? This contains abstract, structured, and collection data. What are primitive data types? Integer, double, long, date, time, string, ID, boolean, etc. are some of the examples of primitive data types. These are passed by value and not by reference. Which platform is used for developing an app in Salesforce? The Force.com platform is used for developing an app in Salesforce. What is the use of blob variable? Blob is a data type that is meant to collect binary data. ToString is a method that converts the blob back into a string. Which operation does not have undelete? The before operation does not have undelete. What is an access modifier in a program? Apex uses access modifiers for defining methods and variables. These are private, protected, global or public access modifiers. Explain exception catch in a program. Java has inbuilt exception handling, and the normal code goes into the try block and the exception handling code into the catch block. How to display a chutter feed record? Chutter feed is the component that is used for the display of chutter feed. What is obligatory outer tag? Which tag is used for displaying a video in the Visualforce? The tag apex page is the obligatory outer tag. The tag apex flash is used to display a video in the Visualforce. Which tag is used to create a button? Which tag is used for a URL link? Which is the tag for password protection? The tag apex command button is used for the button. The tag used for URL link is apex output link. The tag used for password protection is apex input secret. What are the ways to deploy metadata in Salesforce? The metadata in Salesforce is deployed in the following ways. Change sets. Eclipse with Force.com IDE. Migration tool, ANT or Java, based. Salesforce package. What are packages? What are the types of packages? What are managed packages? A package is a bundle or collection of a list of components or related applications. There are two types of packages: managed, unmanaged. Managed packages are used to sell and distribute applications to clients. Developers can sell user-based licenses and applications through the App Exchange for the managed packages. These are fully upgradable. In the case of seamless upgrades, removal of objects or fields is performed. What is a developer console? The developer console is an integrated development tool which has a collection of tools. These can be used to create, debug and test the applications in Salesforce org. What are the types of bindings used in Salesforce? There are three types of bindings used in Salesforce as shown below. Data bindings. It refers to the data set in the controller. Action bindings. It refers to the action methods in the controller. Component bindings. It refers to some other Visualforce components. How to call a controller method within a JavaScript? To call a controller method, Apex function, from JavaScript, you need to use action function. How can we implement pagination in Visualforce? Pagination in Salesforce refers to displaying a large number of records that are spread across multiple pages. The list control displays 20 records per page. Hence, pagination is used to change the page size with controller extension. What is asynchronous Apex? What are its different types? Asynchronous Apex is used to run processes that are scheduled at a later time. There are 4 types of asynchronous Apex. They are future methods, batch Apex, queuable Apex, schedules Apex. Is it possible to edit Apex class or trigger in the production environment? No, it is not possible. We cannot directly edit the Apex class or trigger in the production environment. It can be done only in the developer edition, sandbox org or the testing org. What is the difference between who ID and what ID? Who ID refers to people such as contact or leads, whereas what ID refers only to objects. What is a wrapper class in Salesforce? A wrapper class is defined as a class and a data structure. It is an abstract data type which has its instances formed by a collection of objects. The basic nature is that of a custom object and is defined by the wrapper class properties. It allows records to be checked from a list and process them for a specific action. What is the use of custom settings? What are the types of custom settings in Salesforce? Custom settings are similar to the custom objects. The developers create custom data and associate custom data for an organizational profile or a specific user. The exposure of custom data settings to the application cache is beneficial due to the efficient access with no need for the cost of the repeated queries to the database. This data can be used by SOAP API, validation rule or formula field. What is data skew in Salesforce? The full form of SOQL is Standard Object Query Language. SOQL evaluates a condition in an enterprise when you require to work with, say, 10,000 records. A single user owns huge number of records, and we call that as ownership data skew, and it causes performance issues while updating in Salesforce. What are the options for deploying from sandbox to production org? What is an outbound change set? Various methods are adopted for deploying a sandbox to production. The main method is using the change sets. A change set enables to create and test a new object in the sandbox and then send that to the production org. It contains information on org and not on any data such as records. The other methods to deploy sandbox to production org include force.com IDE, unmanaged packages, as well as anti-migration tools. When sending customizations from current org to another org, the outbound change set is used. Once received by the receiving org, it is called inbound change set. What is the difference between is null and is blank? Use the is blank function for text fields, as text fields can never be null, even if nothing is provided as a value. Is null function takes only an empty value. If is null is used with a text field, then it returns false. How can you call an Apex class in Salesforce? Ways to call an Apex class in Salesforce are as follows. From the Visualforce page, from developer console, from JavaScript links, by using a trigger, from another class, from home page components. Why use batch Apex instead of normal Apex? There are various reasons why batch Apex is better than normal Apex. A normal Apex uses 100 records per cycle to execute SOQL queries, whereas a batch Apex does the same in 200 records per cycle. So, it is very fast when the execution of SOQL queries is considered. A normal Apex can retrieve 50,000 SOQL queries, but in batch Apex, 500,000 SOQL queries can be retrieved. A normal Apex has a heap size of 6 megabytes, whereas a batch Apex has a heap size of 12 megabytes. When executing bulk records, normal Apex classes are more vulnerable to encountering errors as compared to batch Apex. The latter is normally errorless. What is Apex class? An Apex class is a template from which Apex objects can be created. These classes consist of other classes, variables, user-defined methods, exception types, and the static initialization code. What is sandbox in Salesforce? What are the types of sandboxes available? Sandbox is a similar copy of a Salesforce production for testing, development, and training. The content and size of a sandbox may vary depending on the type of sandbox and the addition of the production organization which is associated with the sandbox. There are 4 types of sandboxes available. Developer Sandbox, Developer Pro Sandbox, Partial Data Sandbox, Full Sandbox. Which fields are automatically indexed in Salesforce? The following fields are automatically indexed in Salesforce. Custom fields marked as an external ID or a unique field. Primary keys, ID, name, and owner fields. Audit dates, such as system mod stamp. Foreign keys, lookup or master, detail relationship fields. What are getter and setter methods? The getter method is used to pass values from the controller to the VF page, whereas the setter method is used to set the value back to the controller variable. What is the difference between public classes and global classes in Apex? A global class is accessible across the Salesforce instance, irrespective of namespaces, whereas public classes are accessible only in the corresponding namespaces. What is an Apex transaction? An Apex transaction represents a set of operations that are executed as a single unit. These operations include DML operations that are responsible for querying records. All the DML operations in a transaction either get completed successfully or get rolled back completely if an error occurs, even in saving a single record. What are maps in Apex? Maps are used to store data in the form of key and value pairs, where each unique key maps to a single value. What are the different types of collections in Apex? Collections are the type of variables used to store multiple numbers of records. Types of collections in Salesforce are lists, maps, sets. Differentiate between Salesforce Object Query Language and Salesforce Object Search Language. Salesforce Object Query Language lets us search only one object, We can query for all types of fields in SOQL. Data manipulation language operations can be performed on the query results. Salesforce Object Search Language lets us search for multiple objects. But, in SOQL, we can query only for texts, emails, and phone numbers. Also, DML operations cannot be performed on the search results. What is the minimum test coverage required in order to deploy a trigger? 75%. What is trigger.new? Trigger.new returns a list of records that have been added recently to S-objects. The records that are yet to be saved in the database are returned. Only insert and update triggers have the S-object list, and records can only be modified in before.trigger. What are triggers in Salesforce? How are they different from workflows? Triggers in Salesforce are called Apex triggers. These are distinct and are available specifically for common and expected actions like lead conversions. It is just a code that is executed before or after a record is inserted or updated. A trigger is different from a workflow as the former is a piece of code, whereas a workflow is an automated process and uses no code. What are external ID fields used for? Certain fields can be defined as an external ID on an object. These can be used in order to match up data from external systems with a unique reference ID. For example, if you need to match up data from an external accounting system to the accounts in Salesforce, you can use an external ID field to reference the accounting system's unique ID instead of the Salesforce ID. Can you give an example of a Salesforce API and its usage? Salesforce has a variety of APIs that let you interact with the system in different ways. REST. The REST API lets you integrate with Force.com applications using simple HTTP methods in either XML or JSON formats, making this an ideal API for developing mobile applications or external clients. Bulk. The Bulk API provides a programmatic access that lets you quickly load data into your Salesforce organization. Streaming. The Streaming API can be used to receive notifications for changes to Salesforce data that match a SOQL query you define. Streaming API is useful when you want notifications to be pushed from the server to the client based on criteria that you define. What is OAuth? OAuth is an open standard for access delegation, commonly used as a way to grant websites or applications access to their information on other websites, but without giving them the passwords. What is a connected app? A connected app integrates an application with Salesforce using APIs. Connected apps use standard SAML and OAuth protocols to authenticate, provide single sign-on, and provide tokens for use with Salesforce APIs. In addition to standard OAuth capabilities, connected apps allow Salesforce admins to set various security policies and have explicit control over who can use the corresponding apps. Explain the use of an outbound message. An outbound message is one automation function that can fire from a workflow rule. They can send a message to external web services, which can contain field values. This can subsequently kick off additional processes in external systems. What is a Lightning component? The Lightning Component Framework is a UI framework for developing dynamic web apps for mobile and desktop devices. It's a modern framework for building single, Page applications engineered for growth. The framework supports partitioned multi-tier component development that bridges the client and server. It uses JavaScript on the client side and Apex on the server side. What is the difference between a standard and custom controller? Standard controllers are generated automatically for all standard pages. They provide you with all the functionality that a standard page contains, such as editing or saving a record. Custom controllers can be written by a developer to override the standard functionality that a standard controller provides on a Visualforce page. What is a static resource? Static resources allow you to upload content that you can reference in a Visualforce page, including archives such as zip and jar files, images, style sheets, JavaScript, and other files. What is Visualforce? Visualforce is the component-based user interface framework for the Force.com platform. The framework includes a tag-based markup language, similar to HTML. Each Visualforce tag corresponds to a coarse or fine-grained user interface component, such as a section of a page or a field. Visualforce boasts about 100 built-in components and a mechanism whereby developers can create their own components. What are the different types of collections you can have in Apex? There are three main types of collections. Lists. A list is an ordered collection of elements that are distinguished by their indices. List elements can be of any data type, primitive types, collections, S-objects, user-defined types, and built-in Apex types. Sets. A set is an unordered collection of elements that do not contain any duplicates. Set elements can be of any data type, primitive types, collections, S-objects, user-defined types, and built-in Apex types. Maps. A map is a collection of key-value pairs where each unique key maps to a single value. Keys and values can be any data type, primitive types, collections, S-objects, user-defined types, and built-in Apex types. What is an Apex email service? You can use email services to process the contents, headers, and attachments of inbound emails. For example, you can create an email service that automatically creates contact records based on contact information in messages. What are some Apex best practices? Bulkify your code. Avoid SOQL queries or DML statements inside for loops. Avoid hard-coding IDs. Use of the limits Apex methods to avoid hitting governor limits. Querying large data sets. What is Apex test coverage? What's the minimum test coverage required to deploy? To ensure that your code meets certain standards, Apex code coverage shows you how many executable lines of code in your classes and triggers have been exercised by test methods. Code coverage percentage is a calculation of the number of covered lines divided by the sum of the number of covered lines and uncovered lines. The minimum test coverage required to deploy to production is 75%. What are governor limits? Can you name 3 examples? Salesforce runs on a multi-tenant environment, which means resources, storage, CPU, memory are shared with other companies on the Salesforce platform. This means limits must be in place to ensure that all companies using the Salesforce architecture abide by certain rules and don't let their code or processes monopolize shared resources. A few examples of governor limits are Total number of records retrieved by a SOQL query, 50,000. Total number of SOQL queries issued, 100, synchronous, 200, asynchronous. Total number of DML statements issued, 150. Total number of callouts, HTTP requests or web services calls, in a transaction, 100. Maximum CPU time on the. When should Apex be used over workflow rules or process builder? There are various reasons why you should use Apex over declarative automation options. Workflow rules and process builder operations sometimes have feature limitations that can be overcome with Apex. For example, pulling information from an external system. When dealing with certain or large sets of data, Apex can be more efficient than declarative options due to less limitations. What are the two options for when Apex triggers can run? Apex triggers can either run before a record has been saved or after. A before operation is usually used to verify information that is going to be inserted, and after trigger is used to access data that has previously been entered by a user or system. Can you customize Apex and Visualforce directly in a production org? Apex cannot be customized in a production org. It must be changed and deployed through a sandbox and meet test coverage. Visualforce, on the other hand, may be customized directly in production, although this is not best practice. What options are available to you for deploying from a sandbox to production? There are various ways to deploy from sandbox to production. The main way is to use a Salesforce feature called change sets. These allow you to package up components and then deploying them to another Salesforce org. There are various other methods including ANT migration tool, force.com IDE and unmanaged packages. What is SOQL used for? SOQL stands for Salesforce Object Query Language. It is very similar to the widely used language SQL, structured query language, to query databases. SOQL is specifically designed for Salesforce data and is used to query the Salesforce platform to retrieve data. SOQL is used within Apex and Visualforce to return sets of data. What is Apex? Apex is a strongly typed, object-oriented programming language that allows developers to extend the Salesforce platform by writing their own business logic into the platform. Apex looks similar to Java and can be launched through a variety of user-initiated events such as record updates, button clicks, triggers on objects, or external web service requests.